We have a very specific user group in mind, which is traders who want to trade on blue chips, but they don't want to trade on crazy high leverage like 20x, 50x. For tokenomics, our objective are two. One is at least half should go to the community, meaning non-insiders. And objective two is as much as possible of these community allocations must be liquid immediately at launch at TGE. Regardless of where you hold your token, you can hold your token on a centralized exchange, you can hold your token in wallets, you can put in a liquidity pool, wherever it may be, it accrues value from the activities on the chain.
Hi, I'm here with Larry, founder of Left Curve Software. Left Curve is building a number of things, including Dango, which is a new DeFi protocol that was just announced a couple of weeks ago. A lot of folks know Larry in the space as a CosmWasm developer who used to work at Delphi Labs and left the team in 2024 to build his own DeFi protocol. So we're going to be getting deep into Dango today, how it's unique and what it brings to DeFi. Hey, Larry, how's it going?
Hey, Zeb, doing pretty well and happy to be here.
Yeah, so you were last on I think a year and a half ago or almost 2 years ago. And back then we were talking about your CWD infrastructure project, which was trying to build like a Cosmos SDK-like thing that was entirely built in CosmWasm. You were still at Delphi back then, and you've still since left Delphi to build your own project. Full disclosure, Interop Ventures are investors in Left Curve, and it's been really, really interesting seeing you sort of go from that, go from working at Delphi to now building your own project. So congratulations on that. But yeah, now you're working on this new thing, and recently you guys announced Dango. But there's a lot of components to this. So there's also Grug, which we'll talk about. So yeah, what made you want to work on this?
Yeah, I think there are mainly two reasons. One is our project didn't start from Dango, is that it started from another thing our company is working on called Grug. So Grug is a new execution environment for blockchains. It is meant to be a replacement for existing VMs such as the Ethereum Virtual Machine, EVM, or the Cosmos SDK. So after we built Grug, the next thing we need to figure out is how do we do go to market, right? How do we sell it? It is really difficult to sell a new blockchain infra project. You have to be 10x better than the incumbent, which we do believe to be the case, but it takes some effort to convince people, right? So eventually we decided, well, instead of trying to sell this thing to people, why don't we just be our own customers, right? We're going to build a consumer app using Grug ourselves that uniquely leverages some capabilities of Grug, such that this app can only be built on Grug. It cannot be built on any other platform. And this can be a success story we can use to eventually sell Grug to spin up even more chains.
But why do they want to build a new VM? That's the first question. Maybe that's not obvious to everyone, right? Because we already have the EVM, there's a Solana VM, there's a Move VM. I guess it's CosmWasm, right? Or Cosmos SDK, which I guess you could kind of think of as a VM. Why build a new one? What are these other VMs don't have where we need a new VM?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, I feel there's a disconnection between infra builders and app builders. So there are a lot of things that app builders need that you just don't find in the VM side. So those VMs are typically they're called Turing complete. So theoretically you can build anything, but that's pure theoretical. Practically, there are a lot of things that you just really, really extremely difficult to realize. So I worked on some DeFi projects. I understand what are the missing things. So I just decided, well, let's just build a new VM for app developers. right?
So, like, give me an example. Like, what are some of the things that are missing from those other VMs?
Well, so I can give you two actually. One is native smart account. So in existing VMs like the EVM, an account is simply a private key, or so you have the private key, you the user have the private key, you put the public key on chain, and that key is your account. It is not programmable. It's just a string of zeros and ones. It is not programmable, and that tremendous limit what kind of UX we can build, user experience we can build using the account. So, developers have been asking for smart accounts for ages, but like only a short while ago it was added to Ethereum. But in my opinion, it was still a quite incomplete solution. However, in Grug, smart account is built in as a fully fledged solution into Grug. In fact, we don't even have the traditional private key account. All we have
Every account
is a smart account. Every account is a smart account. So that is
smart.
one. Yeah. and the second feature is cron job. So if you have not heard of the term, what you have to understand is if you want to trigger a state change, for example, I want to send some coins, that is a state change because it involves decreasing your coin balance and increasing the recipient's coin balance. Right. So all the state changes on the blockchain is triggered by somebody sending a transaction. In other words, it is triggered by a manual intervention. In traditional VMs, you cannot enforce a state change automatically. Right. So but in many cases, we do need to enforce state changes automatically. One easy example is you run a perpetual futures exchange. There's a key parameter in the perp exchange called the funding rate. Funding rate is determined by the open interest, long and short, in the market at a given time. So in a perp exchange, you might want to update your funding rate, let's say, every 5 minutes based on the open interest at the time. That needs to be manually triggered. You have to run a bot, for example, to send a transaction every 5 minutes. That can cost you a lot of money over the long term. And if the chain is being congested, your transaction might not even get in. That could
it implies also that someone's writing the spot. So there's like this kind of censorship thing, and then like some teams have thought about ways of, okay, like let's make this, like the binary that allows you to do this transaction, or let's allow anybody to make this transaction. Let's make that an open thing, but it just really creates this kind of bottleneck where, you have to have someone making that transaction. Whereas here, like the chain can run its own transactions, basically.
Right. So this capability is built into Grug. And these are just two things, but there are a lot more.
Cool. And Grug is built in Rust, but so if someone coming from the kind of CosmWasm side of things, like how familiar is it for them to build using Grug? Is it like the sort of similar development environment, or are they learning something completely new?
Well, so it's not going to be different. Not going to be too different. It's not going to be too difficult. And the reason for that, which I really love about CosmWasm, is that it tries to stick closely to native Rust. It is not building a new framework on top of Rust, which is the case for example, the Anchor framework in Solana. So if you build a program, a smart contract in Anchor, it looks like distinctively a Solana program. It doesn't look like a native or every other Rust program. But in our case, both CosmWasm and Grug follows a philosophy to stick as close to the native Rust as possible. So we are both really similar. So there's not going to be a big difference because we have this shared philosophy.
And that allows you to also utilize existing Rust libraries, correct?
Yes, and that is actually a big reason I don't want to develop a blockchain-specific language like Solidity or Move, because, well, there are certainly benefits in doing so, but if you develop a domain-specific language, you have a smaller developer community. You have to rewrite all the libraries. You have to reinvent all the tool chains, and you have to re-audit everything. In my opinion, for a lot of the applications, it's just not worth it.
Yeah, it's a bigger lift. There's benefits to that because you kind of gain the benefits of having very specialized language, but there's like it's a huge lift in terms of having to rewrite a lot of libraries, auditing, etc. Whereas with like an existing language, you're benefiting from all of that that baggage, I guess you could say.
Yeah. So like one aspect, one example I always like to point out when discussing this is, building a compiler is tremendously difficult. And if you look at the existing Solidity compiler, well, it's not very good. And the manifestation of this is that you notice for a lot of the high performance Solidity contracts, the developers need to write assembly code, which is really difficult. And they have to do that because the compiler is just not very smart. It cannot produce efficient machine code from your Solidity source code. So they have to write assembly. Yeah. However, on the other hand, we don't invent our new compiler. We just use the native Rust compiler, Rust to WebAssembly compiler, which is like one of the most optimized software of all time. And we just use that. We don't have to invent our own.
Right. So just maybe for people who are not like familiar with what a compiler does. So the compiler takes human readable code and transforms that into machine readable code. And what, some Solidity developers are doing, or Ethereum EVM smart contract developers are doing, is instead of writing their code in Solidity, they're writing the code directly in machine code so that they can bypass the compiler. But that carries with it like quite a bit of risk, right? Because you have to be very precise, and like these machine readable code, we don't code in those for a reason, is because like they're very low level. They're very close to the machine. Now you can be much more precise in what you're building because you're working pretty close to the actual bits that are being processed. But there's also like a much larger margin for error if you do kind of mess up.
Right.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that's like a pretty good overview on Grug, and I'm sure we'll come back to Grug throughout this conversation. But Dango is this product that you guys have announced a couple of weeks ago on Twitter. There's a really nice long-form article sort of explaining all of the different aspects of Dango, why you're building it, why it's different from existing DEXs and DeFi protocols, the tokenomics, everything. It's all there. So folks who want to read that should definitely check it out. We'll link to it in the show notes. But if you're lazy like me and you like to listen to podcasts, you can keep listening to this episode. And so first, what is Dango and how is it different from other DeFi protocols? And like, who are you targeting with this? Like, who is the user that you have in mind for Dango?
Yeah, so we have a very specific user group in mind, which is traders who wants to trade on blue chips, but they don't want to trade on crazy high leverage like 20x, 50x. So for doing this, their best tool is to use margin. But if you look at today's DeFi landscape, there's actually isn't a very good way to do margin trading in DeFi, which is like a really surprising fact for me because margin trading is such a basic use case. You can do that very easily on Binance or other centralized platforms, but you don't have a very good choice in DeFi. So let's just assume you are a trader. You want to take a 3x long leverage on Bitcoin, right? What are your options? You can use perpetual futures. You can do DYDX or Hyperliquid. However, a drawback of perp is that it is generally more expensive. In fact, on Hyperliquid, there is a page that compares the funding rate on Hyperliquid and margin rate on various other platforms. And if you look at that, the funding rate is generally a lot more expensive than what you can get on Binance if you do margin trading. So So that is perf. The only other option you have is using a lending protocol like Aave. However, as said, we assume you want to do 3x, but you go to Aave, you realize, oh, you actually can't do that because Aave only gives the WBTC a max LTV of 73%. That means you need, if you deposit $100 of WBTC, you can only borrow up to $73 of USDT, for example, and you swap USDT back to WBTC again, that gives you a 1.73x position, which is still a bit distance from the 3x you want to achieve. So if you want to really do 3x, you have to deposit your WBTC into the protocol again, borrow USDT, do the swap, and repeat. So actually, if you follow my Twitter, you know that I am doing this exactly right now. I am taking a 3x long position on Bitcoin as we're speaking on Aave. And I have to create a spreadsheet, do a bunch of math just to figure out what to do. So I think it's too difficult for 99% of the users.
Yeah, I mean, I've got some long positions on Aave too, right? And it's you've got to deposit the collateral, then you have to lend against some other asset, right? So let's say you have ETH, then you lend some USDC, and then trade that for ETH again or whatever asset you wanna leverage, and maybe do that loop once or twice if you want to get enough the right amount of leverage. But you don't get Aave doesn't provide you with the kind of figures to say, okay, you're leveraging 3x, and on your entire position, let's say you've done this loop twice, here's your liquidation threshold. You've got to figure that out by yourself, and that is kind of complex. So, if you're looking for just a quick and easy way to do leverage, well, that's one way. Doing perps, I think, is another way. I think perps are probably I don't use perps very much just because I find them to be sort of intimidating. If I find them a little bit intimidating, then the average user probably will too, right? There's lots going on, and sort of a lot to keep track of to make sure that you're not getting wrecked on your position. But then there's the margin account, and one protocol actually that I think does this pretty well, and I'd like to get your thoughts on how it's sort of similar or different to Dango, is Nolus. So Nolus is, they call themselves a DeFi lease, but when reading about Dango and how you describe the credit account, to me, it sort of feels similar to what they call a DeFi lease. So wonder if you could maybe compare the two and in your opinion, how they're different.
Well, I'm not so familiar with Nolus, but I'm pretty familiar with two other protocols that are trying to do the same thing, which are Gearbox protocol on Ethereum and Mars here in Cosmos, which I worked before. These two kind of both figured out the credit account design simultaneously, but separately. So the main difference with them is we utilize the smart account feature in Grug, which we mentioned before. And as a result of that, our protocol is about 70 to 80% smaller, meaning less code, less computation than them. And as a result, you get a lot cheaper gas fees and a lot of better user experience.
Yeah. I mean, I've used Mars a little bit. I haven't used Gearbox. So yeah, I mean, Nolus, you have this account, you deposit collateral, and you can do up to 3x leverage on a number of assets. So like a margin account, your assets are kind of locked in that account, but all you're doing is leverage, right? So there are no additional products. You can't then go and kind of swap those assets for something else. It's a quite simple just leverage product, and you can also short since recently it's also a Cosmos chain. But I guess with Dango, you guys, and we'll get into this, have a pretty extensive roadmap of assets that you want to support and other products that you want to like integrate within this. So, let's talk a little bit about the UX here, like from a user perspective. What is that going to look like creating a margin account and then getting leverage on it on your assets? Like, what's the UX for that?
Yeah. So what you just mentioned, what Nolus does is what I would call the minimal set of feature we're going to launch with. But after post-launch, we have a lot more things to do, to add. Because if you only have this minimal set of features, what's the point? You can do the same on Binance. So why would you take the extra step to do it on a decentralized platform, right? My answer to that question would be, we have a lot of more DeFi integration in Binance. Like for example, on Binance, you don't have access to the yield from Ethena, which is like the most hyped, most popular yield protocol of this cycle. But on our platform, you have the option to tap into the Ethena yield. And that's just one example. So the good thing about DeFi, it is everybody can come in and build something, and it is entirely composable with everything else on the chain. So post-launch, we're going to be pretty aggressively adding new features. We're going to start with perps. We're going to do some yield farming vaults, and we're going to do a whole lot more fun stuff that uniquely leverages Grug. We can talk about that. But you also asked about UX. That's another thing we're working on and we're really proud of. So in Dango, we created a web app called Portal. So the motivation of this is, there's something I really dislike about the current status of DeFi, which is there is a lot of fragmentation in UX, not of liquidity. People talk about fragmentation of liquidity pretty enough. But there's also the fragmentation of UX. What I mean by that is, if you want to swap some tokens, you have to go to Uniswap. If you want to do some lending, you have to go to Aave. If you want to trade perps, you go to the other website. If you want to do something else, you have to go to 10 other websites. I don't think that's the experience that users want. So at Dango, we created a single web application called the Portal. And it is going to be the single place where you do literally everything on our platform. So we essentially created what I would call a blockchain operating system, if you may. And it makes it super easy for third-party devs to come in, build something. It's super easy because you don't have to manage all the wallet connectors, onboarding, and all sort of like that. You just build a widget and plug into our portal, and that's it. And our portal can help you distribute. We have an app store, which can help you get more visibility to users. So that's going to be another major innovation on our side, the portal UX.
Cool. So let's talk about a margin account. So for those people who are not familiar with this concept, that comes from traditional finance and is used by brokerage accounts. What is a margin account?
So margin basically means you deposit some assets of your own. But let's use the same example that you want to go long on Bitcoin. You would deposit some Bitcoin of your own, and then you borrow some assets from somebody else. It could be the brokerage, or it can be a group of decentralized liquidity providers in case of DeFi. You would borrow an asset you want to short. In this case, you think Bitcoin will go up against US dollars, so you would borrow US dollars or a dollar stable coin. You swap that to Bitcoin. So you have price exposure to Bitcoin, and you have liability or margin. They're kind of synonymous in the asset you want to short, which is the US dollar.
Yeah. So with a margin account, like you're depositing assets typically volatile assets like Bitcoin, ETH, could be like Atom. You're borrowing USD against that. You're maintaining your exposure to the assets in the margin account, and then you can go and borrow USD to do whatever you want with. Like you can go buy some more BTC, or you can swap that ETH for some other asset, or sorry, that USDC for some other asset. You can and effectively creates leverage. Like, why are margin accounts so uncommon in DeFi? Like, as far as I know, there's only a handful of protocols that do this. Most lending protocols or dexes or perp dexes don't provide a margin account.
Well, I think in traditional lending protocols, they just did one thing wrong, which is the way Aave or Compound works is when you bring in your collateral, your Bitcoin, in order to borrow, you have to lock in your Bitcoin in their protocol. So your Bitcoin goes into the Aave protocol lending pool. It no longer sits in your own account, right? And only after doing that, you can borrow assets. You can borrow your US dollar stablecoin, for example.
Yeah.
And you can only borrow dollar stablecoin of a value less than your collateral. So as we talked about in the example before, if you borrow $100 worth of Bitcoin, you can only borrow up to $73 of USDT, for example.
Yeah. But there's one distinction here, and I think the distinction is useful to remember, that in a margin account, your assets remain inside the margin account. I can't take that USDC and like go buy a car with it. Whereas with Aave, that borrowed asset, I can go do whatever I want with it. That's sort of like the right way to look at these two things, right?
Yeah, those are two different use cases, right? What you would do with margin account is to do margin trading. The use case you mentioned is, I think that applies more to protocol founders, for example, who owns a lot of their protocol's own tokens, but they cannot sell it because if they do, the market will lose confidence in their project. So what they would do is they deposit their own tokens into this protocol and borrow a lot of assets, then they can use to buy a mansion or something like that.
Yeah.
So I would say Aave serves this second use case really, really well, but it doesn't serve the margin trading use case, which is something we want to do.
Yeah. So one of the things you mentioned in the blog post is that there is this whole category of, you call them dinosaur assets, that are completely absent or mostly absent from DeFi. BTC, I guess, like, is on its way to becoming more and more integrated in DeFi. Of course, it has been with wrapped Bitcoin, but it's not native Bitcoin. But there's a whole list of other assets like BCH, Litecoin, DOGE, XRP, Cardano, and the list goes on, that primarily traded on centralized exchanges that don't have really reliable bridging to DeFi, nor are there any places where you can really sort of trade these things or borrow against them in DeFi. This is something we've talked about on the podcast too as well. And I think like there's a huge opportunity here to unlock like tons of tens, potentially hundreds of $1 billion of liquidity for DeFi. Yeah, talk about your plans to bring all these really long-standing assets to DeFi.
Yeah, so we asked ourselves, well, we want to bring liquidity to our chain. So what's going to be the liquidity we should looking for? There are some liquidities are really sticky that is going to be really, really difficult for us to move. For example, we definitely want to support Solana liquid staking tokens in our lending pool as collateral. However, I think Solana LSTs has a tendency to stay on Solana. They are sticky. They are not very likely to just move to another chain, right? So it's going to be really challenging to attract those liquidity But then you look at the broader blockchain scape, you realize, oh, there are actually a lot of dormant liquidity that's not being used anywhere. And that are these, well, I call it dinosaur chains, which is a little, I guess, disrespectful if you're holding those coins, but that's the truth, right? They were developed ages ago. They don't have smart contracts, which in itself is a good thing. A chain stays true to its purpose, which is not bad in of itself, but it also means they are difficult to get bridged to other chains and being used in mainstream DeFi. So these are still billion dollar assets that has tremendous amount of trading volume on centralized venues that DeFi has failed to capture. Right? So we decided, well, this is going to be a group of users we want to target. So we are building our own bridge for these chains.
You're building your own bridge?
Yeah. Because there isn't a very good one available at this point.
Right. And what about like solutions like Thorchain? These are not sufficient, or like I guess they don't support all of these assets?
Well, Thorchain doesn't support all of the assets, and there's another concern, which is that Thorchain is building its own DeFi right now after the acquisition of Kujira, and I don't know if they acquired Lavana, but they are teaming up with Lavana at least. So
they're teaming up with Lavana, yeah.
Yeah. So you can argue we are going to be competitors. So it's going to be a little weird if you are relying on a competitor for asset onboarding. What if they charge us a fee, right?
Yeah.
That's going to be risky.
Right. So you guys will have your own IBC compliant bridge over MPC TSS?
So it's not going to be so. Well, so it is going to be operated by our chain's validator set. Right. So the bridge is going to have the same trust assumption as our chain itself. The technical specification, we're still working on that. So okay. it can be threshold signature. It can be something else.
Okay. And are you guys like kind of working alongside Osmosis, because they're also building something similar for bridging native Bitcoin to Osmosis? But I guess a bunch of assets, right, with this Polaris product.
Well, at this point, we're not.
Okay, interesting.
But we can definitely look into that.
Yeah, I mean, so they're building, this Polaris product, which is, I guess, like, you could look at it as a cross-chain swap product that also introduces this idea of being able to create an account for basically any chain, whether they support it or not. So like if you wanted, or whether or not you have a wallet. So let's say you want to trade, I don't know, Bitcoin for ton, their validator set will create a key for you that will allow you to hold native ton, even if you don't have a wallet. So as I was reading this and like reading about the passkey stuff you guys are working on, which we'll talk about, it just, very, very similar to what Osmosis is working on. Which is great. I mean, I think like we need better UX and having an ability to like bridge assets natively to any chain. Leveraging a validator set to run an MPC kind of like threshold scheme is really cool. I wish more chains would think about doing that, or that practice would become more generalized and therefore like more secure. And I want to talk about the passkey thing too. So, You've described in this post like the user experience of using Dango as like a one-click kind of create an account using a passkey, and that your keys are linked to an account with a username, so you could have Seb 3.0 on Dango. I'll make sure to register that on day one, and it's a keyless approach. So what are some of the challenges with working with passkeys, and like what are the security assumptions people need to have?
Yeah, well, so before passkey, let's talk a bit about the broader picture. So nobody likes to generate seed phrase and memorize or keep seed phrase. So the biggest, everybody agrees the way to improve wallet UX is first we need to get rid of the mnemonic phrase or seed phrase.
Yeah.
But there are, broadly speaking, 3 different ways of doing it. There's MPC wallet, which you mentioned is what Polaris uses. And then there is social login, so login with your Google account or Apple account or Twitter account. So, and then there's passkey, right? So for the first 2 options, the main drawback is they're not complete self-custodial. You don't truly own your own key. So either if the validators that collude to steal money, they can do it, or if Google for some reason wants to freeze your account or take your money, they can do that.
Yeah.
So, but passkey is a self-custodial solution. So passkey is a new, authentication standard that is being worked on by Web2, an alliance of Web2 corporations. So, we hate seed phrases. In Web2, they hate passwords as well. So passkeys is a solution they designed to replace passwords. But why is passkey not being adopted in blockchains? Well, so actually, Sunny from Osmosis gave a talk on this at Cosmoverse last year.
Yeah.
No, it was in Maddie, not last year. Maddie.
Yeah, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Cosmoverses ago.
Yeah. So, but the short story is that passkey uses a cryptography scheme called SECP 256 R1. That's a long name, but you just need to know the R1 part. While most modern blockchains use another scheme called SECP 256 K1. So R1 K1. And the reason that we are not using R1 in the blockchain world was because when Satoshi created Bitcoin, he believed that the US government has a backdoor in the R1 scheme.
Right. Okay, I didn't know that.
With which we have found no evidence so far.
But you can't be sure.
It can be true. It's not provable.
It's
right?
provable. Yeah.
You never know. So Satoshi used this different setup, which has a different cryptographic properties that you can be more sure there's no backdoor. And every other chain since Bitcoin just adopted it. So that means blockchains these days do not have native support for the R1 scheme. And because most blockchains, as I said, don't have smart contract accounts, so it's not possible for you to program the R1 scheme in a smart contract either.
Yeah. So how do blockchains get around this thing? Because I mean, there are a few passkey enabled wallets, and you can now create a passkey. So, I think I just answered my own question. So you're using smart accounts then to the passkey controls the smart account rather than the cryptography on the on-chain cryptography.
Yeah. So those solutions more or less all rely on some smart contract components to carry out the authentication.
Okay, so the chain doesn't support the passkey cryptography, but you can have the smart account support the passkey cryptography.
Yes. Yeah.
Got it. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Interesting. And I guess another thing about passkeys, like I use passkeys, 1Password, and this sort of thing. But one thing that's unclear to me is how passkeys are non-custodial, because like my passkeys, I guess the keys to that are somewhere in my secure enclave, but they're also backed up to iCloud. So if I were to lose access to my iCloud account, like let's say Apple doesn't like me and they're like cut off my iCloud account, can I still access those passkeys? And like, what are ways that people can, mitigate that sort of solution and maybe have some kind of a backup or an encrypted backup so that they don't lose their passkeys? Because if like all of a sudden you have, millions of people start using crypto and onboarding with passkeys, being aware of the risks to your sovereignty is quite important, I think.
Yeah. So my understanding is passkey is stored as said in a secure enclave on your device. It is not synchronized to your iCloud account. When you want to use the passkey on a different device, it is used. It uses a sort of a secret sharing protocol. I believe it's Diffie-Hellman. So they use a secret sharing protocol to basically transport the key from one device to another without having to go through a third party, gets decrypted or something like that.
Okay, got it. So the passkey, the encryption keys are on the device, and they're shared across devices, and there may be some kind of like secret sharing thing, encrypted secret sharing thing.
Well, at least if you use the Apple keychain or the Google password manager, that should be the case. If you use some password managers like 1Password, I do believe it is uploaded to 1Password server in the encrypted form, of course. So it really depends on like which keyring provider you use.
Yeah, and you could also have a YubiKey, which is like a physical device, looks kind of like a ledger, where I think there you probably have some kind of a like seed backup or something. I've never used a YubiKey, so I'm not sure, but
right. So our smart account, the way our smart account work is you can add more than one authenticators. So you can have a passkey on your Apple device, you can have a passkey on your Google device, you can have a MetaMask secret key, you can have a Phantom wallet. And when you send a transaction, you only need to submit a signature from any of these authenticators. And of course, if you don't feel comfortable with that, you can also add a two-factor authenticator. So like a one-time password.
yeah,
You can also do that.
And can you, so one of the things Osmosis wants to implement is this kind of permissioned approach to transaction types. So for example, if you're, say, swapping under $100 worth of assets, you may be able to do that with your passkey. But if you want to like move tokens outside of your account, then you'd have to sign with your ledger, or maybe sign with two devices. Is this something that's possible with the smart accounts on Grug?
Well, it is possible because our accounts are smart contracts. So
They're programmable.
Program that. The exact feature you just mentioned, we don't have it spec'd out. But we can totally program the contract if there's need for that, like if there's demand.
Cool. Coming back to Grug a little bit. So Grug is its own sovereign blockchain. It uses Tendermint as consensus. And one interesting thing about Grug is the validator set and the way you're going about, running consensus on that chain. Can you describe a little bit what you guys are doing and what motivated these decisions?
Yeah, so our chain will be running on a so-called proof of authority validator set. So proof of authority basically just means it is a determined set of validators. It is not generated, for example, by proof of staking. It is which is different from almost every Cosmos chains today. So you know on Cosmos Hub or Osmosis, you would stake your tokens, and the top 150 or so validators who has the most stake becomes the current active validator set. So that is proof of stake with delegation. On Thorchain, you also have proof of stake, but you don't have delegation. So validators have to bring their own tokens. But the common feature of these two mechanisms is it is permissionless to entry, and the validator set is dynamic. Some can drop out, new people can come in, right? But in proof of authority, we just basically the creator of the chain, the foundation, will choose a set of people to run nodes, and it's going to be a static set of nodes. So the only other Cosmos chains which I know that runs on this is Noble, and in the Ethereum world, I think a lot of the rollups are following the same approach. Yeah, so the reason we opt for this is it's really to have a focus on our product, Because if you look at existing Cosmos chains, I feel a common feature of them is that the security aspect of the chain is intertwined with the product side of the chain. So what I mean by that is on Osmosis, you can swap on DEX, you can provide liquidity. That is the product side. But you can also delegate to validators, stake your tokens, participate in governance, discuss how to spend the community pool money, right? Those are the security and governance aspects of the chain. And you may disagree, but my assessment is a lot of the users don't like to spend effort on the security side. They don't want to lock up their token for 14 days, 21 days. They don't want validators to take X% of their rewards as commission. They don't want to get involved in the governance drama. So for Dango, we want to really focus only on the product side. We don't want to get the users to be distracted by the security and governance aspects. And I think this is what worked out really well for Hyperliquid, right? If you look at Hyperliquid, they had a single focus, which is just to build the best UX perp DEX. They don't have a permissionless validator set. For a very long time, they only had 2 nodes in the same data center, both run by the team, and the chain is closed sourced. So it's as centralized as a blockchain can possibly be. Like, many people actually argue it is not a blockchain; it is a centralized exchange. But whatever you think, they put a lot of focus on product, and they delivered, and the users rewarded that. And now after the token launch, they are also moving on to decentralize the chain. I think they're introducing permissionless validator entry and staking in their next upgrade. So this is the path we want to follow. We remove these distractions. We build a good product first, and if we can achieve product market fit, then we think about decentralizing the chain. It can either be a permissionless validator set, or we can even just go become a rollup on Celestia, for example. There's a lot of options, but for now, we don't have to think about that.
That's great, man. I think that this approach should be studied and adopted more and more. And I think, achieving product market fit is and should be the most important thing that any blockchain protocol or like application is doing. And yeah, all of these, sort of like the governance aspect of it, it's great. It allows the community to be a part of it, and maybe to some extent, generate some great ideas about the future of a blockchain. And for some chains, that might be desired. It might be desirable for there to be like broad community involvement. In the case of Cosmos chains, even though that has been sort of the selling point for Cosmos, most people don't vote in governance. Most people leave it up to their validator sets, and validators end up making the decisions for the direction of the chain software and kind of like roadmap, etc. And another pretty significant, I guess, failure. I don't know if it should be a failure, but like lesson in Cosmos is the cost of inflating your token in order to pay your validator set. And chains that are able to generate revenue and pay their validator sets for in US dollars, for instance, right? And like in the case of DYDX, I think are they don't have to worry or kind of think about maintaining value of their token in order to be able to pay their validators. And like a lot of chains in Cosmos suffered during the bear market and continue to suffer, and I don't think we'll ever recover. So I think this is a great idea, and we're also investors in Noble, and I really thought that this was the right way to do it. And then later, should the chain be successful, and there's like a clear go-to-market strategy that's been executed, and there's products, people using the product, etc. You want to decentralize, then there are like lots of options to do that, and at that point, one can study and sort of understand what the right path and what the right alignment might be with, say, like Celestia or like settling to Ethereum or Eigenlayer or whatever. So I applaud this approach.
Yeah, you know, I mentioned hyperliquid. It's on one extreme of the spectrum. On the other extreme, I like to think about is Fuel V1. So if you don't know, Fuel V1 is a so-called stage 2 rollup. It has fraud proof. It has forced transaction inclusion. It is a based rollup, so it is super decentralized, and it has a TVL of like $10. So like nobody uses it. So I guess it really depends on your value, right? If you want to go the Fuel V1 path, you can do it. But for us, we want to do the hyperliquid path.
Excellent. I guess another aspect here that I thought was really interesting in the post was that you guys were doing a Mica-compatible ICO. And I think that's the first time I hear of a protocol, a DeFi protocol, fully embracing Mica. So what is the motivation behind this, and how are you going to go about, what are some of the perhaps constraints or considerations that you have to take into account when launching your token for it to be compliant with Mica regulation?
Yeah, well, so ICO, the alternative to ICO is to do private rounds. So basically, instead of making the token available for public trading, the protocols will raise funds in the private market, and it will do a series of rounds. Each round has a higher valuation, and as the valuation goes up, the founders can also cash out their shares in the private market, and then the token eventually becomes public. The valuation is already so high that very likely it just starts going down only in terms of price, and everybody who buys the token loses money and is unhappy, right? So the reason a lot of the protocols have adopted this strategy in the past year or two is regulation. That's literally the only reason. There's no other reason. Is because regulations are hostile to ICOs. That's the reason why like consumers, like retail investors, are basically being preyed for exit liquidity. However, we are seeing things turning. Europe made this regulation. They usually hate Europeans for making too many regulations, but I guess Mica has a lot of positive, and one of them it makes a clear guideline for launching a token, and it is pretty feasible for us to follow. And then of course the US now has a pro-crypto administration, which is also very positive. So yeah, we want to go with this ICO path. I think the big benefit of ICO is if you are an investor and you buy your token in the ICO, that probably means you have a lot of faith in the project, and you are not very likely to sell in the short term. So this group of people who buy the ICO is going to be a very strong community members, and as the product getting built, more features coming in, hopefully the token will gain in value. The early investors make money, and they will help spread the word, and the community gets stronger and bigger. So, and I think ICO is really an effective way of building a community, and the community is really, like, for a lot of projects, it's everything, right? So
how does it work, like practically speaking, as a, well, is this ICO kind of open to anyone? I guess, do you have to KYC in order to participate? As an investor in this ICO, do you acquire tokens using fiat or like other cryptocurrencies? And here's the kicker, is this ICO also available to American investors given the current securities laws there?
Yeah, so we're doing this. We're going to do ICO very likely, well, not 100%, but very likely on the platform called Legion. So Legion was launched a short while ago. They already did a first ICO for a DePIN project called Pulse, which went very well. So if you're interested, just go check out Legion. They are actually one of the best UX in crypto I've seen. In terms of KYC, yes, unfortunately, they do require KYC in order to invest. For US investors, I cannot say for sure right now, because the administration I mentioned has not taken office just yet. So there's a lot of uncertainty. We still have to see. But I think it's a pretty good chance we can do it offer it for American investors. Yeah, not certain yet, but I'm pretty positive.
What's the timeline on the ICO?
So in the white paper, we said Q3, but now we really want to do it early. So the answer is as early as possible. We are going to try get it no later than June or July, but hopefully earlier.
So the tokenomics have also been released, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about what the token allocations look like, and also this buyback and burn mechanism that you've announced and how that's going to work.
Yeah, well, so first of all, everything in this white paper are just our ideas at this point. It can change, and indeed there have been a few things already we are going to change. For example, the launch timing. So this everything I said is not done deal, but in terms of
binding.
Not binding, yeah. But for tokenomics, our objective are two. One is at least half should go to the community, meaning non-insiders. And objective two is as much as possible of these community allocations must be liquid immediately at launch at TGE. So the current plan is 30% will do the ICO, and 20% we will do a lock drop. So lock drop means you bring your liquidity and you pledge to lock up in our liquidity pool or lending pool for a chosen period of time, and that will give you a portion of the TGE allocation. So if you remember back in the days, SushiSwap did this vampire attack on Uniswap. It will be a very similar concept.
And what are you going to vampire attack?
Well, Osmosis, Thorchain, Uniswap. I don't want to make enemies, but you just made me do it. But yeah, So, and we are also earmarking 15% for liquidity incentives for over the 4-year period. So that amounts to 60%. We also earmarked 5% for the foundation, but that might actually go to community as well. We're still deciding on that, and the rest would be insiders.
And and can you describe this buyback and burn mechanism?
Yeah, so we're not going to do a token staking. So my assessment, I said, is users generally don't like to stake, to lock up their token in exchange for governance power, which they don't necessarily care anyways. And they have to waiting for a 14-day, 21-day unlocking period, which is, they don't like it. So why don't we just build something that users like? So we decided on doing buyback and burn, so that regardless of where you hold your token, you can hold your token on a centralized exchange, you can hold your token in your wallet, you can put in a liquidity pool, wherever it may be, it accrues value from the activities on the chain.
Right. So you're just like sort of making away with the entire kind of staking, inflation-based value accrual of your token, or I guess like yield generation of your token. Rather, the buyback and burn will effectively reduce the supply of the token, which should have positive effects on the token price.
Yeah, and maybe it can also be better for tax as well. It depends on your
interesting
local tax law, I think.
Hadn't thought of that. Okay. Cool. Well, I think we've covered pretty much all of it. Is there anything we forgot here?
Well, maybe one last thing that we are doing differently from every other protocol is we are doing a low supply token. In the white paper, I proposed a number of 30,000, which a lot of people find confusing. So 30,000 is a reference to Yearn Finance, which was one of the pinnacle of the 2020 DeFi summer. It is a fair launch. It is a wildly popular protocol, and it has a very low supply of 30,000. So it's a tribute to that. We kind of want to bring back the vibe of the 2020 DeFi summer. Yeah, but we might not eventually go with 30,000. We might go for 1 million because 30,000 may be a bit too low, but we still want to stick with the low supply, high value route.
Excellent. So as we wrap up here, I guess people should check out this blog post, this Twitter post. I'll link to it in the show notes. Where else should people go to sort of stay up to date on Dango? And are there any exciting announcements coming soon that people should look out for?
Yeah, so the next big thing we are going to do is in January, we are going to launch a so-called demo net. So that is going to be a public testnet for demo purposes. The first demo net is going to be showcasing our account system as mentioned. And after that, we're going to release a series of demo nets, probably on the cadence of one each month, and each with incrementally more feature as we build them. So yeah, follow our Twitter, join our Discord, and once the time comes in January, give it a try.
Cool. Larry, thanks so much for coming back on again, and looking forward to having you again on the podcast soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers.